My name is Savannah. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of how my stepmother and half-brother tried to murder me over a birthday dinner in Napa Valley 3 months after they'd already killed my husband. The first warning came as a folded napkin pressed into my palm by a server I'd never seen before. Run to the emergency exit now. Do not look back. It was scribbled so fast, the ink was barely dry. I read it twice under the table while my father raised his glass to toast how our family needed to bond after our recent tragedies. Across from me, my stepmother Valerie smiled, the warmest smile she'd ever given me. That's when I realized my own family was preparing to bury me, and I decided right then that I would make them confess every single thing they'd done. I excused myself with a fake work emergency, walked straight past the heavy steel exit door, and stepped into a freezing parking lot where everything I believed about my husband's death was about to shatter. 3 months ago, I stood in a black dress that felt 2 sizes too heavy, watching them lower my husband into the ground. The casket was closed. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Clayton had a smile that cracked his whole face open. And the idea of that smile being sealed away behind polished mahogany made my chest feel like it was caving in. But the funeral director explained it gently. The impact had been too severe. I nodded. Because what else do you do when the man you love is gone and everyone is waiting for you to be strong? The police report used the words, mechanical brake failure. It was clinical. Clean. Almost sterile. An officer handed me a folded copy at the grief counseling session and said it was an open and shut case. No signs of foul play. He told me, just a tragic accident on a dangerous stretch of road. I signed the paperwork without really reading it. My brain was underwater. Every ordinary task felt like wading through cement. And the idea of questioning official findings required a strength I simply didn't have. Clayton's family took the news with tears that felt practiced. My stepmother Valerie clutched my hands for a full 15 minutes. Her eyes wet and red, whispering about how Clayton had been like a son to her. She even sobbed into my shoulder during the eulogy, her mascara leaving dark smudges on my coat. Seth, my half-brother, stood beside her with a crumpled tissue pressed to his face. He sniffled loudly when the pastor mentioned Clayton's generosity. And then, in the middle of the reception, I watched him pull out his phone and smirk. Not a sad, nostalgic smile. A genuine, involuntary smirk at whatever was glowing on that screen. He tucked it away quickly. But I saw it. I told myself he was probably looking at a memory, a photo of happier times. I was so desperate for that explanation to be true that I swallowed the doubt whole. Vaita, my father, hovered at the edge of the room for most of the afternoon. Every time I tried to reach for him, he was on the phone. I caught glimpses of him near the caterers, nodding seriously, his hand pressed to his ear like the conversation couldn't wait. He hugged me once, briefly, his arms stiff and his eyes already scanning over my shoulder for the next obligation. Stay strong, sweetheart, he said. That was the entire extent of his comfort. Then he disappeared into a corner to talk business while I stood alone by the flower arrangements, clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee I never drank. But the detail that haunted me most wasn't the casket or the smirks or my father's distance. It was Clayton's maintenance records. I found them in his office drawer 3 weeks after the funeral. When I finally gathered the courage to sort through his things, he was obsessive about his car. The kind of man who logged every oil change, every tire rotation, every minor coolant flush. The last entry was dated 10 days before his death, a full inspection by the dealership. Everything stamped and approved with 0 issues. Noted, that car did not have failing brakes. It had just passed a complete inspection with flying colors. I stared at that receipt for an hour, my grief fog telling me I was overthinking. The police said mechanical failure. The police were the experts. I shoved the records back in the drawer and tried to forget them. Have you ever ignored a truth because accepting it would have been too painful? I carried that maintenance receipt in my head for another month, telling myself I was just a grieving widow looking for somewhere to point the pain. Then my father called. "Savannah. Sweetheart. Seth is turning 34 on Saturday. Valerie's planning something beautiful at a winery in Napa. We need you there. We needed you there." That phrase had been the leash my family used on me for as long as I could remember. I almost said no, but some stubborn part of me still believed that if I kept showing up, kept playing the good daughter, I'd eventually feel like I belonged somewhere. So on Saturday at 7:30 the evening, I walked into a private VIP room that cost more to book than my first car, and I sat down to celebrate the half-brother I barely spoke to. With the stepmother who watched me like a hawk, the room was gorgeous in a way that felt engineered. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the valley vines, golden in the last of the evening light. A long table was set with candles, crystal glasses, and bottles of wine that ran $400 apiece. Seth held court at the head of the table in a blazer I suspected cost more than my rent. He air-kissed my cheek when I arrived and called me sis with all the warmth of a man reading lines off a cue card. Valerie watched me from the other end of the table, and at the time I told myself I was imagining how intense her stare was. But I wasn't. She was tracking my hands, my glass, how much I was actually drinking. Have you ever sat at a table full of people who claim to love you and felt more alone than you've ever been in an empty room? Because that's what that night was. Forced laughter every time Seth made a joke. Exaggerated gasps when Valerie pretended to hear a story for the first time. And me, silent, refusing to get swept up in the performance. Then my father stood and raised his glass. "I just want to say a few words about family," he announced. "We've been through tragedy this year. We've lost someone important. But we're still here. We're still standing together." He said Clayton's name exactly once, and then moved on quickly. Like mentioning him too long might stain the expensive tablecloth. Valerie dabbed at perfectly dry eyes with her napkin. Seth glanced at his phone under the table. That speech was never about family. It was about optics. About looking like the grieving patriarch, while the real work of the evening happened underneath it all. And that work started with a nod, right after the toast. Valerie's eyes flicked across the room to a server standing near the wine cart. She gave him a single sharp nod so brief I almost dismissed it as a refill signal. 2 minutes later, that server was at my elbow. He removed my glass, still 3/4 full, and replaced it with a fresh pour of deep red wine that caught the candlelight like a warning. But the strange part wasn't the wine. As he set the crystal down, his fingers grazed mine, and something small and folded slid into my palm, a napkin. Damp with sweat, I closed my fist around it before anyone could see, and I felt the entire evening shift. It was 8:04 p.m. when I finally dared to unfold it. I kept my hands in my lap, fingers wrapped around that damp napkin like it might burn through my skin if I opened it too fast. I waited until my father turned to refill his glass, and Seth glanced down at his phone, 2 tiny distractions that made the moment safe enough to look. Then I unfolded it. 1 line, scrawled in urgent, jagged handwriting. The ink smeared at the edges like it was written in a hurry. "Run to the emergency exit now. Do not look back." I read it once, and my brain refused to process it. I read it again, and my heart slammed against my ribs so hard I was sure the whole table could hear it. The room shrank. The candlelight blurred. Blood roared through my ears, and my fingers went so numb that the napkin almost slipped twice before I managed to crumple it back into my fist. This wasn't a prank. Nobody at this table jokes. And somewhere in that animal part of my brain, the part that knows when a shadow moves in a dark room, I understood that if I looked up right now, I'd see the threat sitting across from me wearing my stepmother's smile. So I didn't look up. I forced myself to breathe slow and quiet, swallowing the panic like it was something I could digest. My knuckles were white under the table. Every instinct I had was screaming, "Run! But running without a reason would raise questions, and questions get people hurt. I pulled my phone from my purse and sighed loud enough to sound annoyed. "Oh. For the love of," I muttered, holding the screen to my ear like I'd been waiting for a call. "I'm sorry. I have to take this. Work crisis. The Eastwood deal is falling apart. Vague. Loud. Plausible." I stood up so fast my chair scraped the polished floor. Valerie tilted her head, her face flickering between concern and something I didn't want to name. Walter frowned like a man who thought emergencies were rude but not impossible. I could feel their eyes crawling over my skin as I mouthed sorry and grabbed my coat, heading for the heavy steel door at the end of the corridor. The hardest part was walking. I wanted to sprint. I wanted to break into a run so badly that my thighs ached with it. But I made myself move at a normal pace, one foot in front of the other, feeling their stares land between my shoulder blades. Then, as he passed the doorframe, I heard it. Seth's fork paused, mid-bite, the tiny clink of metal stopping against the rim of his plate. He was watching me. I felt his gaze drill into the back of my skull like a hot needle. I didn't look back. I couldn't, because looking back would have meant seeing the faces of the people planning to bury me, and I honestly wasn't sure I'd survive that. I pushed the steel bar with both palms, and the door swung open into the freezing night air. The freezing valley wind hit my face the second I cleared that steel door, sharp, unforgiving, cutting through my coat like it was made of paper. The parking lot stretched out in front of me, dark and nearly empty. Just a few cars glinting under a single street lamp. My SUV was parked at the far end. I started walking fast, heels crushing loose gravel, the sound echoing too loud in the silence. I was halfway across when I heard footsteps. Fast? Gaining on me. My body locked up before my brain could catch up. I spun around, hand already inside my purse. Keys wedged between my fingers like a weapon, because you don't get a second chance in an empty parking lot when you've just been warned to run for your life. A figure jogged into the dim circle of yellow light. It was him. The server. The one who'd swapped my glass. He stopped a few feet away and raised both hands, palms open. Then he ripped the black apron from his waist and threw it into a trash bin like the uniform disgusted him. "My name is Pierce," he said, voice low and urgent. "Licensed private investigator. I'm not a waiter. I kept the keys ready." "Prove it." He moved slowly, reaching inside his jacket. And for one awful second, I was certain he was going for a weapon. Instead, a leather wallet flipped open under the yellow light, a credentials badge. Official, with his photo and a gold seal. I stared at it, then at him. "Why were you serving my family dinner?" He didn't apologize. He stepped closer until I could smell the cold on his coat and dropped his voice to a murmur. "That glass of red wine they put in front of you, it wasn't wine. Sedatives. A lethal dose." I shook my head, denial rising before I could stop it. "That's insane. Those are my family members in there. Which is exactly why I needed you to walk out of that room without making a scene," he said. "I've been watching that table all night. I saw exactly what went into that glass." Something in his voice wasn't accusation. It was certainty. "Why would a private investigator be at my stepbrother's birthday party?" Pierce exhaled. And for a moment the professional mask cracked. Something raw flickered behind his eyes. "Old pain. Because this isn't their first time," he said quietly. "And I've been waiting 2 years to prove it. Have you ever had one of those moments where every safe thing you believed about your life shatters at once, and the only person you can trust is a stranger holding a badge?" Before I could ask what he meant, he nodded toward my car. "Not here. Follow me. I have somewhere safe we can talk." I glanced back at the building. Warm light spilling from the VIP room windows. Somewhere in there, my father was still toasting family bonds. And 2 people I called family had just tried to poison me. I followed him. What he told me next turned the entire night, and everything I thought I understood upside down. It was 811 when we reached his car, an unremarkable sedan parked under a dead streetlight. He didn't start the engine. He turned to face me. And the look in his eyes stopped me cold. "The glass they brought you," he said slowly, "contained a lethal dose of heavy sedatives, enough to put an adult under within minutes. You'd have been unconscious before you finished your second sip." I opened my mouth to argue, but he kept going. He'd watched that table all night. At șapte cincizeci și doi. He saw Seth slip a small glass vial to the bartender and watched the bartender pocket a thick wad of cash to look the other way. Then Pierce leaned in, voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Your stepmother pulled Seth close while your father was checking his phone," she said. "Make sure everything ends at curve 7. Curve 7. Those two words hit harder than the poison ever could. Every local knew, curve 7. The most treacherous stretch of the mountain pass. A blind hairpin where the guardrails had been crumbling for years. Beyond them, a sheer drop hundreds of feet down into a rocky ravine. Nobody survives a fall there. Not in a car. Not in anything. The rest of the plan assembled itself before he could explain it. They'd let the sedative drag me under. Then, Seth would volunteer to drive his poor, intoxicated half-sister home. Halfway up the mountain, he'd slide my limp body into the driver's seat, wedge something heavy against the gas pedal, throw the gear shift, and send my SUV sailing through the broken rails. A tragic accident? A grieving widow who drank too much at a family celebration. If I'd taken a single sip of that wine, I would have woken up falling midair, headed for the ravine, with nothing but gravity to keep me company. Have you ever stared at the only family you have left and realized they've already planned your funeral? I was still shaking when the second realization slammed into me. Clayton, my husband. He died on a nearly identical winding road. Brakes inexplicably failed. Late business meeting. No foul play suspected. Case closed in under a week. I couldn't breathe. Clayton was the most careful driver I'd ever known. Every service logged. Every inspection dated. Every receipt filed in that binder in his office. He'd shown me his fresh inspection certificate days before he died. Brakes don't just fail on a man like that. But I buried the doubt under grief. Signed the police report. Accepted the condolences. And told myself the universe wouldn't be that cruel. Now I knew better. Standing in the freezing dark. The truth finally surfaced. My husband had been murdered. And I'd missed it. Not because the clues weren't there because I'd looked away from them. Pierce didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence said everything if Valerie and Seth could pull this off tonight. They were absolutely capable of killing Clayton 3 months ago. And they'd been holding their breath ever since. Waiting for the right moment to make me disappear too. Then he finally spoke. And his voice was different, quieter. Like the strength had drained out of it. "I wasn't tracking Seth for a client," he said. "I was tracking him for my sister." I went very still. "Her name was Chloe," he said. "She was 26. She'd just bought her first house. She had a rescue dog she adored. And she had about $250,000 sitting in her retirement account. Seth met her at a networking event, charmed her for 3 months, then convinced her to pull every cent out and invested in a so-called can't-miss opportunity. He even drove her to the bank himself. She was so excited. Savannah, she thought she was building a future. My stomach churned. Then he invited her on a weekend hiking trip. Pierce continued. Somewhere remote. A trail with steep drops and no cell service. She never came back. Authorities ruled it an accidental fall. They did a quick investigation, found no witnesses, and closed the file. They never even looked at her bank records. By the time I did, the money was gone, moved through 3 accounts, and vanished. I stared at him, You've been investigating him for 2 years. Every single day, he said. And I've been waiting for a chance to prove what I already know. My sister was murdered. His voice cracked. She'd hiked that same trail a dozen times. Seth pushed her. Savannah, I can't prove it with a witness. But I know it the way a brother knows. I pulled my coat tighter. But the cold had already sunk deeper than any fabric could reach. I thought about Clayton again. The closed casket. The officer calling his death a tragic accident. The way Seth had smirked at his phone during the funeral, like he was congratulating himself on a job well done. Those weren't the pieces of one crime. They were the signature of the same man. Seth had killed before. Clue. Maybe others I'd never heard of. My husband wasn't his first victim. I was just the next name on the list. I pressed my fist against my mouth until the shaking stopped. Then I looked at Pierce and said, "Then we make sure he never gets the chance to do it again." Pierce nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here." Pierce didn't elaborate. He turned and crossed the dimly lit room to a scratched wooden desk in the center, pressed a button on a laptop that looked older than my marriage, and rotated the glowing screen toward me. "Sit down," he said. "You need to see this." The screen was covered in spreadsheets, bank records, transaction logs, betting slips that went back almost 2 years. These were the kind of documents you only get through legitimate investigative databases. The ones that require a license and months of paperwork to access. And running through every single one, like a dark thread woven into the fabric of my stepbrother's carefully constructed life, was the same number $3 million. "Seth owes this," Pierce said flatly, "to a sports betting syndicate operating just outside the county lines, not a bookie who sends polite reminders. A violent, organized operation. They collect with baseball bats and broken bones." He clicked to a second window, intercepted digital communications. I read them twice. Because the first time my brain refused to believe what my eyes were seeing. Payment overdue. 30 days. This is your final extension. We know where you live. Your legs are collateral. The messages grew shorter and meaner with each date. The most recent one simply read TikTok. I pressed my hand to my mouth. My stepbrother, the one who laughed too loudly at parties, who wore designer watches and acted like the world owed him a living, had been running from something far darker than debt collectors. I thought about all those family dinners where he'd drum his fingers on the table, checking his phone under the napkin. I thought he was bored. He was terrified. There's no legitimate income. Pierce continued. No job. No savings. No assets. Seth cannot produce $3 million through any legal means. He's been desperate for months. And these people don't send warnings, they send enforcers. I stared at the escalating timeline of threats. Then I looked at him. "You're saying this is why he died." "Clayton was step 1. He said quietly. "You're step 2. A man drowning in that much debt will do anything to stay above water. And Seth killed Clayton to start clawing his way out." The words hung in the air like smoke. "My husband didn't die because of bad breaks on a dangerous mountain curve. He died because a man I called family owed $3 million to people who collect with violence. And the sickest part, I was the next payment. Have you ever had to accept that the people who should protect you were the ones planning your funeral?" I sank into the chair across from him, and the wooden legs groaned like they were carrying the weight of everything I'd just learned. $3 million. My stepbrother was drowning in debt to men who collected with enforcers. Not lawyers. But a question still burned in my throat. "Why me?" I asked. "Clayton's already gone. His money's locked in the trust. What does killing me accomplish?" Pierce set his jaw. And for a long moment he just looked at me. "Because you're the only thing standing between them and all of it." He opened another file on the laptop, and this time, the spreadsheets made my blood run cold in a completely different way. They were inheritance documents, estate planning summaries, The kind of paperwork you only see when someone very wealthy wants to make sure their fortune goes exactly where they intend it to go. Clayton had been meticulous about this too. His life insurance policy, a clean $4 million, named me as the sole beneficiary. His irrevocable trust, which held commercial properties across 3 counties, was structured to pass to me upon his death, with the assets locked under my signature alone, but there was a default clause. Cold. Legal language that turned my stomach inside out if I were to die without heirs. The entire fortune would automatically route to Walter as next of kin. Not to charity. Not to someone who would guard Clayton's legacy. Straight to my father. And my father, I knew with horrible certainty, didn't make a single financial decision without Valerie's hand guiding his. She'd spent 20 years slowly sliding into the center of every account Walter controlled. If I disappeared, the insurance payout would hit Walter's account within weeks. The trust would eventually unwind in his name. And Valerie, who had been quietly managing the family finances for over a decade, would hold absolute administrative control over every dollar, every property, every investment. I said it out loud before he could. She'd siphon it straight into Seth's accounts. Pierce nodded slowly. The estate lawyers are strict, he said. But strict terms don't protect you from the person holding the pen after the beneficiary is gone. That was when the whole conspiracy finally snapped into focus. Clayton didn't die because of a random brake failure. He died because my stepbrother needed the first domino to fall. The trust only fully unlocked on my death, the death of the surviving spouse. That meant I was the final signature. The key. The roadblock that had to be removed for millions to flow into Seth's desperate, gambling-addicted hands. They hadn't wanted me dead because they hated me. They wanted me dead because my heartbeat was the only thing standing between them and $10 million. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a liquidation event. An asset to be written off. I sat there in the dim light, breathing through the nausea. And I understood my husband's murder with a clarity that made me want to scream. Clayton was step 1. I was step 2. And if I'd taken even one sip of that wine, the whole inheritance would have fallen into their hands like a ripe fruit waiting to be picked. Then Pierce moved. He didn't say a word, he just reached into a thick manila folder resting beside the keyboard and slid a single glossy photograph across the scratched wood. It landed face up in the cone of lamplight, and my breath caught in my throat. The man in that photograph was Brody. I'd known his face for years, the grease-stained mechanic whose shop sat on the edge of town. The one everyone whispered about, but still visited when they needed something done off the books. The timestamp in the corner burned into my retinas 2 days before Clayton's brakes failed on that mountain pass. I didn't wait for Pierce to finish the story. I yanked my phone out of my purse. Thumb hovering over the keypad. We're calling the federal authorities. Right now? They tampered with his car. They put poison in my wine. This ends tonight. I started dialing before the words were even out of my mouth. Pierce's hand came down over my phone so fast, the screen went dark. Don't. I gaped at him. Excuse me. You can't make this call yet. His voice was flat. Deliberate, the voice of a man who'd spent 2 years learning exactly how the system fails people like us. Look at what you actually have. Savannah. A grainy photograph of Seth handing cash to a mechanic. Spreadsheets showing gambling debts. My testimony about a wine glass I never even tested. All of it is circumstantial. That's not nothing. I shot back. It's not enough. He lowered his hand but didn't step away. A judge will not sign an arrest warrant for murder without concrete proof linking Seth to the physical tampering of Clayton's vehicle. Not a motive. Not a photograph. Physical evidence. We don't have the brake lines. We don't have a witness who saw him under that car. And we certainly don't have a confession. I opened my mouth to argue. And he cut me off again. The moment you call the authorities, your stepmother finds out within hours. She has money. She has lawyers. and she has every dirty secret she's ever touched sitting in a safe that can be emptied before the sun comes up. Brody vanishes. The bartender goes silent. The shop gets a fresh coat of paint and a new story. Every piece of evidence we've worked for disappears with them. My hand closed into a fist around the phone. So what do? Sit here and watch them get away with it? No. Pierce leaned forward. And for the first time since we'd entered that office, something like fire flickered behind his eyes. We get them to say it out loud. We need a recorded confession, one where they detail exactly how they killed Clayton and exactly what they plan to do to you. That's the only thing a prosecutor can hold on to. I stared at the photograph lying on the weathered surface of the desk. Have you ever had to look at the proof of your husband's murder and realize the law couldn't touch the people who did it? That's the moment I understood what I had to do. I set the phone down and looked Pierce straight in the eye. Then we make them talk. That night, I barely slept. But by 9 the next morning, I was on the phone with Clayton's trust attorney, Mark Ellison, the same man who'd handled our estate since before we exchanged vows. I caught him mid-sip of his coffee. And the noise he made when I told him what I needed could have curdled milk? I need a formal draft agreement for asset transfer. I said, I'm moving management control of the Meridian Plaza Commercial Shopping Center over to Seth. Silence stretched so long I checked if the call had dropped. Then Mark's voice came back slow and careful. The way people talk to someone they suspect has lost their mind? Savannah. Meridian Plaza generates over $400,000 a year in net revenue. Are you telling me you want to hand that to your stepbrother? Yes. Another pause. Then I gave him the instruction that nearly made him hang up entirely. And I need you to leave the notary signature block completely blank. His breathing changed. Savannah. That renders the entire document legally unenforceable. It wouldn't survive a single challenge. This isn't a legitimate transfer. I know exactly what it is. Mark. The line went quiet again. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to that careful level lawyers use when they suspect a client is being coerced. Is someone threatening you? If you're under duress? We need to contact the authorities. I can have a protection order filed before lunch. I almost laughed. If only he knew how badly I needed the opposite of protection. No one's threatening me. I need paperwork that looks real enough to make someone greedy feel invincible for exactly 5 minutes. He started to argue, and I cut him off. I'd had enough of men telling me what I couldn't do. Prepare the draft. Leave the signature block blank. Send it to my secure email within the hour. You still work for me. Mark. I heard him exhale. He agreed with all the enthusiasm of a man walking into the electric chair, already reciting his malpractice disclaimer in his head. The file landed in my inbox at 1032 that morning. Stamped across the top in red draft not for execution, I printed it on the office printer, slid the crisp pages into a leather binder, and when I snapped the cover shut, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 months. Control. The trap was simple. And it worked because Seth Cain was the greediest human being I'd ever met. Greed makes people careless. It numbs the part of the brain that checks for tripwires. I was going to hand him a document that promised him everything millions in revenue. Executive power. The respect he'd never earned and let the monster inside him do the rest. He wouldn't just accept it. He'd have to talk about it, gloat about it, brag about how he'd cleared the path to get there. Men like Seth never keep their victories quiet. They need an audience. Pierce had said it best, a confession given freely, with no threats and no coercion, is the only kind that holds up in a courtroom. We just had to let Seth believe the money was already his, and that the only thing standing between him and the life he wanted was the past he thought he'd buried. I closed the binder, looked at Pierce through the dusty morning light, and said the thing that would carry me through the next 72 hours. All I have to do now is walk into my father's house and hand Seth the rope. Pierce didn't waste a single minute. By 10:15 that same morning, he was on a secure line with a senior detective he trusted at the Napa County Sheriff's Office. Detective Ray Hollis had spent 15 years working homicide and white-collar cases. And he didn't ask questions the way civilians do. He just listened. Then said, "Give me the location and the trigger word. My teams will be in position before sunset." And they were. That evening, Pierce drove me along the perimeter of my father's estate, pointing out things I never would have noticed on my own. A faded green sedan parked half-hidden behind a row of abandoned grapevines at the south edge of the property, unmarked Unit 1. A delivery truck idling 2 streets over, its engine running low. A man in a mechanic's uniform slouched behind the wheel Unit 2. A pickup truck in the church parking lot across the main road. Windows rolled down despite the cold Unit 3. All of them silent on the radio. All of them waiting for one word from me. Then Pierce opened a small black case I'd seen him carry into the office. Inside, nestled in foam. He was a device so tiny, I had to lean in to see it properly. A microscopic audio transmitter with real-time wireless capability, designed to link directly to the police surveillance receivers. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger, and for a second it just glinted in the pale light. "This is your voice," he said. "Everything Seth says in that living room, every word, every threat. Every confession goes straight to the sheriff's deputies parked outside. They hear it all." He pinned it behind the folded collar of my coat, then adjusted the fabric twice until even I couldn't tell it was there. For the next 30 minutes, we ran audio checks. I walked to the other end of the room and spoke in a normal voice. He asked me to whisper. He asked me to laugh. He had me crumple a piece of paper and set a glass down on a table. Every single test came back clear. The device picked up everything: the soft rustle of my sleeve, the scrape of my heel, the breath between my words. That's when he gave me the safe word. "Pineapple," he said, looking me dead in the eye. "If the situation turns violent, if you're in physical danger, you shout that word at the top of your lungs. The moment it hits the receiver, the tactical team breaches the residence. No waiting. No negotiation. They come through the doors like the devil himself is chasing them." I said it back twice. Let him hear the weight of it in my mouth. Have you ever had to make yourself the bait to catch someone who destroyed your life? That's what I was doing. I was the trap. And everyone I loved was already dead or waiting outside in an unmarked car. Pierce climbed into his sedan, then rolled the window down one last time. "One more thing," he said. "If for any reason the radio goes dark, if something happens to that transmitter, I'm coming in myself. I didn't survive 2 years of watching Seth Kane to lose him now." I watched his taillights disappear down the gravel road. And I stood there in the freezing wind with a wire against my collarbone and a safe word on my tongue. 2 days later, when I drove through my father's iron gates, I wasn't a grieving widow walking into a trap. I was the trap. The gates swung open for me at exactly 2:15 on a gray Tuesday afternoon. And the dry screech of the hinges sounded different this time. It wasn't a welcome. It was a warning. I parked in front of the massive double doors and sat there for a moment, feeling the cold metal of the wire pinned against my collarbone. Pierce's voice echoed in my head. "Keep them talking. Let them think you're broken." I took one breath, then another. Then I grabbed my leather tote bag and stepped out into the estate that was supposed to be my childhood home. Walter opened the door before I even knocked. He wrapped his arms around me with a force that's supposed to feel protective. And I let him. I let him hold me while he delivered a speech that sounded rehearsed in front of a mirror for hours. "Savannah, sweetheart, we've been so worried about you. Tragedy shouldn't break a family. You need to lean on us now." Lean on you, I thought. You served me poison 48 hours ago. But I pressed my face into his shoulder and made my shoulders tremble. Because that was the performance he needed to see. Valerie stood behind him wearing a cream silk blouse and the most genuine smile I'd ever seen on her face. That moment confirmed it. She was rejoicing. She thought I'd come to surrender. She took my coat with both hands, humming softly, and led me into the living room like I was a guest of honor instead of a dead woman walking. For exactly 5 minutes, we sat on the leather sofas exchanging small talk that made my skin crawl. Valerie asked about my sleep. Walter asked about my car. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. My car. The one they'd wanted me to die in. I said it was running fine. And Valerie's smile flickered for half a second before she smoothed it back into place. Have you ever had to sit across from people who tried to kill you and pretend you didn't know? I kept my hands folded in my lap. I kept my voice soft. I let them see exactly what they wanted. A broken widow on the verge of giving up everything. A doi doazet și unu. The landline rang. Walter made a show of apologizing hand on my shoulder. Profuse promises to return quickly before retreating upstairs to his private study. The study door clicked shut somewhere above us. And just like that, I was alone with the two people who had planned my murder. The silence stretched. I could feel the tiny transmitter against my collarbone. Cold and reassuring. Every breath I took was being heard. Every word from here on out would be evidence. Valerie settled deeper into the sofa cushions, with the patient smile of a predator who knew her prey had nowhere left to run. And for the first time in 3 months, I smiled back at her because she had no idea the trap had already been sprung. Valerie pushed a steaming porcelain teacup across the polished glass coffee table toward my side. Drink up. Sweetheart, she said. Her voice wrapped in that manufactured warmth I'd learned to distrust years ago. You look pale. God knows you've been through so much. This will help calm your nerves. The chamomile steam curled up between us, and I watched her eyes flick down to my hands, checking for tremors. Checking to see if the widow was still broken. I left the teacup sitting exactly where it was. I didn't touch it. Didn't even look at it. Instead, I reached into my leather tote bag with deliberate slowness and pulled out the thick manila envelope. Seth's head tilted like a predator catching movement. What's that? Something we need to talk about, I said softly. I set the envelope on the coffee table, then drew out the professional leather binder and let it land with a solid thump that made the glass vibrate. The pages slid out just far enough to reveal the bold official heading across the first page, Draft Agreement for Asset Transfer. I watched Valerie's eyes catch on those words. The air in the room changed sharp. Electric. Hungry. I let out a long, heavy sigh. Not forced. The sound of a woman at the absolute end of her rope? I'll be honest with you both. I'm exhausted. 3 months of managing Clayton's estate tenants. Contracts. Dispute. Lawyers calling at 7 in the morning. I can't do it anymore. I'm not cut out for this. I never was. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for them to lean in. So I've made a decision. I'm surrendering full administrative control of the Meridian Plaza Commercial Shopping Center. Effective immediately. It all goes to Seth. Valerie blinked. For half a second, her composed mask flickered, and underneath it I saw something raw and desperate trying to process what I'd just said. I pushed the binder another 2 inches across the glass closer to her hand. Like an offering. Every lease. Every revenue stream. Every decision. His now. I don't want the money. I don't want the meetings. I don't want the responsibility. I want to heal. I want a quiet life. I made my voice crack at the edges. Peace is worth more to me than that entire building ever was. I'm trading the business for my freedom. Have you ever had to hand your enemy exactly what they wanted, the thing they were willing to kill for, just to make them tell the truth? I leaned deeper into the sofa cushions and let the tears come. Not real ones, but real enough. Clayton left me everything. And I've spent every single day since he died feeling like it's crushing me alive. The lawyers have been pressuring me to make a permanent decision about the estate. I paused, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. So this is my decision. The attorneys have already prepared the initial transfer documents. They're sitting on the table. waiting for final execution. All we have to do is sign. I let my gaze travel from Valerie's stunned face to Seth's and back. I just want this family whole again. That's all I've ever wanted. The hook was set. I could feel the wire pressed against my collarbone, transmitting every syllable. Now all I had to do was wait for them to bite. The greed hit him like a physical force. The moment I said commercial shopping center, Seth's eyes snapped up from his phone with a predatory gleam I'd never seen before. He lunged across the coffee table, nearly knocking over Valerie's teacup, and snatched the leather binder out from under my fingers before I could even finish my sentence. His hands were actually trembling as he tore through the pages, scanning the revenue projections, the property valuation, the clauses detailing his new executive authority. Gone was the bored, dismissive stepbrother who'd spent the last decade pretending I didn't exist. In his place sat a starving man who'd just been handed the keys to a feast for a full 2 minutes. The only sound in the living room was the frantic rustle of paper. Seth flipped back and forth between pages like he was checking for hidden traps, his lips moving silently as he calculated the monthly income. $400,000 a year. The number stared up at him in clean black print. And I watched his entire worldview reorganize itself around it. Valerie's composure cracked right down the middle. Her rigid matriarchal posture dissolved, her shoulders dropping as a smile spread across her carefully painted lips, a smile so warm and maternal it made my stomach turn. "Oh, Zavana," she breathed, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "This is such a mature decision. Clayton would be so proud of you." "Sweetheart, really? Prioritizing your mental health over corporate greed, that takes real strength." She kept going, spinning out praise like silk, telling me how Seth had the business acumen to expand the portfolio, how I deserved a quiet life, how this would finally bring our family together. Every word was a performance, and she was giving it everything she had. Seth didn't even look up. He was still hunched over the contract, running his finger down the column of projected profits, muttering numbers under his breath like a prayer. He was gone, completely, utterly consumed, and completely blind to the wire pinned against my collarbone, transmitting every syllable to the detectives waiting outside. I shifted on the sofa, arranging my face into something that looked like mild confusion. "Oh, Seth. Speaking of which, do you still keep in touch with that mechanic?" "Brody?" I asked, letting the question hang in the air. My SUV's been making this awful metallic noise lately. I was thinking of taking it somewhere else. But Clayton always used to say... I paused, biting my lip. "Well?" He used to complain about issues every time he came back from that shop. Seth snorted without lifting his eyes. "Brody can fix anything if the money's right. That's the whole point of him. You give him enough cash, and he'll make any problem disappear." My pulse spiked. "What do you mean?" Finally, he looked up. The smirk on his face was pure cruelty, lazy, dismissive, utterly convinced of his own superiority. "I mean, your husband drove a car he couldn't handle. Some roads are meant for people who know what they're doing. Clayton didn't. And people who can't handle high-performance vehicles..." He shrugged, turning back to the contract. "They get what's coming to them on the asphalt." My blood went icy, but I forced my voice to stay soft. "You really think that's what happened? Doesn't matter what I think." He waved a hand. Already bored again. "He's gone. You're here. We're signing this deal today." Valerie's eyes narrowed. She'd heard it too, the careless cruelty in her son's voice, the confession disguised as dismissal. But before she could intervene, I leaned forward. "One more thing. Seth." My voice was steady. "Why did you have Brody tamper with Clayton's brakes?" Seth's head snapped up. And for one beautiful, satisfying second, Pure panic flickered across his face. He hadn't expected that question. He'd spent years looking down at me, and the idea that I might have teeth had never once crossed his mind. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Seth. Valerie's voice cut through the air like a blade. She was on her feet, and the warm mother mask she'd worn all afternoon had finally slipped. Her eyes were flat, cold, and completely sober. He asked me about Brody. Seth muttered, the closest I'd ever seen him, come to sounding like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And I said that's enough. She moved around the coffee table and positioned herself between her son and me. For a moment, she just stood there, gathering herself, and I watched the mask slide back into place. Then she lowered herself onto the sofa, smoothed her skirt, and fixed me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Savannah. Sweetheart, I'm going to say something to you as a mother. Grief does terrible things to a person's mind. It makes you invent connections that were never there. It makes you say things that can hurt you. She reached out and patted my hand. Her fingers were cool and dry, and I had to fight every instinct in my body not to pull away. And sometimes, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, stubborn individuals who keep poking into things that don't belong to them bring terrible consequences down on their own heads. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I looked at her hand resting on mine, and I thought about my husband dying alone on a dark curve. And I said, are you threatening me? Valerie, of course not. Sweetheart. She squeezed once. Hard. I'm just saying the past should stay buried. For everyone's sake, isn't that right? The words buzzed straight into the wire pressed against my collarbone. And the silence that followed was so thick, I could taste it. Have you ever had someone rewrite your reality so smoothly, so lovingly, that you almost believed the lie yourself? I pulled my hand away slowly and tilted my head like I was genuinely puzzled. Funny you should mention the past. Valerie. Because I've been thinking about the birthday dinner, about the wine glass. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers curled into her palm. The server took my old glass away before I'd even touched it. And you gave the nod. I saw it. Her laugh came a half second too fast. Brittle and bright. Savannah. That first pour was cheap. I simply asked them to bring you a better vintage. You were a guest at my son's birthday celebration. Why wouldn't I want the best for you? Right. I nodded slowly. And the second glass was already poured when it arrived. Waiting. Ready. I let the pause stretch. That's an odd thing to do for someone you care about. Valerie's jaw tightened. The veins at her temple pulsed. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, I said softly. I'm asking, did you have any idea what was in that glass? Before she could answer, Seth slammed the binder down on the glass table so hard the whole thing jumped. That's it. I'm done. He yabbed a finger at me. His face twisted with irritation. My mother told the server to bring you a decent bottle of wine. That's all. You're sitting here picking apart a stupid dinner party when I'm holding a multi-million-dollar contract that needs to be signed. Today. He shoved the papers across the table toward me. Stop wasting everyone's time with fairy tales about wine glasses and dead husbands. And sign the damn document. And every single hateful word ran straight into the sheriff's receiver. Let me count the words to ensure I'm within 407 to 551. This draft is approximately 520 words. Good. Seth's head snapped up. And for one beautiful, satisfying second, pure panic flickered across his face. He hadn't expected that question. He'd spent years looking down at me. And the idea that I might have teeth had never once crossed his mind. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Seth. Valerie's voice cut through the air like a blade. She was on her feet, and the warm mother mask she'd worn all afternoon had finally slipped. Her eyes were flat, cold, and completely sober. He asked me about Brody. Seth muttered the closest I'd ever seen him come to sounding like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, and I said that's enough. She moved around the coffee table and positioned herself between her son and me. For a moment she just stood there, gathering herself. And I watched the mask slide back into place. Then she lowered herself onto the sofa, smoothed her skirt, and fixed me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Savannah. Sweetheart, I'm going to say something to you as a mother. Grief does terrible things to a person's mind. It makes you invent connections that were never there. It makes you say things that can hurt you. She reached out and patted my hand. Her fingers were cool and dry, and I had to fight every instinct in my body not to pull away. And sometimes, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, stubborn individuals who keep poking into things that don't belong to them bring terrible consequences down on their own heads. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I looked at her hand resting on mine, and I thought about my husband dying alone on a dark curve. And I said, are you threatening me? Valerie, of course not. Sweetheart. She squeezed once. Hard. I'm just saying the past should stay buried. For everyone's sake. The words buzzed straight into the wire pressed against my collarbone. And the silence that followed was so thick I could taste it. Have you ever had someone rewrite your reality so smoothly, so lovingly, that you almost believed the lie yourself? I pulled my hand away slowly and tilted my head like I was genuinely puzzled. Funny you should mention the past, Valerie, because I've been thinking about the birthday dinner. About the wine glass. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers curled into her palm. The server took my old glass away before I'd even touched it, and you gave the nod. I saw it. Her laugh came a half second too fast. Brittle and bright. Savannah. That first pour was cheap. I simply asked them to bring you a better vintage. You were a guest at my son's birthday celebration. Why wouldn't I want the best for you? Right. I nodded slowly. And the second glass was already poured when it arrived. Waiting. Ready. I let the pause stretch. That's an odd thing to do for someone you care about. Valerie's jaw tightened. The veins at her temple pulsed. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I said softly. I'm asking. Did you have any idea what was in that glass? Before she could answer, Seth slammed the binder down on the glass table so hard the whole thing jumped. That's it. I'm done. He yabbed a finger at me. His face twisted with irritation. My mother told the server to bring you a decent bottle of wine. That's all. You're sitting here picking apart a stupid dinner party when I'm holding a multi-million-dollar contract that needs to be signed. Today, he shoved the papers across the table toward me. Stop wasting everyone's time with fairy tales about wine glasses and dead husbands. And sign the damn document. And every single hateful word ran straight into the sheriff's receiver, Valerie's threat. Seth's confession. All of it. Tucked behind the collar of my coat and broadcast to the ears of the law. Seth's finger froze on the final page. Right where the notary seal belonged. His eyes narrowed. Scanning the signature block empty. Blank. He flipped the binder over. Checked the back. Flipped it again. Hunting for the official stamp that would make this real. Then he saw it. A faint diagonal watermark running across the page. Unexecuted draft. My heart slammed against my ribs. The entire living room went silent. Seth's breathing turned heavy. His knuckles going white as he gripped the leather binder so hard, the metal ring snapped open with a sound like a gunshot. You. His voice came out low and shaking. You brought me a worthless piece of paper. He stood up slowly. And for a heartbeat, I thought he might throw it at me. Instead, he kicked the glass coffee table. The heavy slab flipped end over end before crashing onto the hardwood floor. shattering into 1,000 razor-sharp shards that scattered across the expensive rugs. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the debris. Seth, don't. His eyes were wild now, completely unhinged. You set me up. You actually set me up. I kept moving backward, calculating the distance to the hallway. The next 30 seconds would decide whether I walked out of this house alive. Seth lunged before I could reach the hallway. His hand closed around my collar and he slammed my back against the sofa, so hard the frame groaned. Cold metal pressed against the side of my neck, a box cutter. Blade flicked out. Sharp enough to catch the light. Call the estate attorney. He snarled, breath hot on my face. Authorize the wire transfer. Every cent. Now. I kept my eyes locked on his and said nothing. Valerie stood frozen behind him, shrieking for him to stop. Put it down, if there's a mark on her. The whole accident story falls apart. His grip tightened. Shut up. Mom. I felt the blade bite just slightly against my skin, and for a split second, I let myself feel the fear. This was exactly the moment Pierce and I had rehearsed. Every word, every threat. Feeding straight into the wire pinned beneath my collar. I gathered every ounce of air in my lungs and screamed the safe word at the top of my voice, Golden Gate. Less than 2 seconds later, the patio doors exploded inward. Armored deputies poured through the breach. Tactical weapons raised. Voices booming orders to drop the weapon and get on the ground. The next few minutes blurred into chaos. Tactical officers tore Seth off me, slammed him face down onto the shattered glass, and snapped handcuffs around his wrists while reciting his Miranda rights. Valerie collapsed to her knees, shrieking, until a female deputy hauled her upright and charged her with conspiracy to commit murder. At the top of the staircase stood Walter, completely frozen, watching his cherished family crumble without saying a single word. 6 months later, Brody accepted the plea deal. From the witness stand, he described in grinding detail how Seth paid him to cut Clayton's brake lines 2 days before that mountain drive, all in exchange for a fat envelope of cash. The jury deliberated under 3 hours. Seth received life without parole, showing zero remorse. Valerie got 30 years in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy, wire fraud, and insurance fraud. After the verdict, Walter blocked my path outside the courtroom, tears streaming, begging me to forgive him, swearing he never knew. I pulled my arms from his grip and told him the truth. His ignorance wasn't innocence, it was complicity. He chose his peace over my safety, over Clayton's life. Then I walked into the California sun, and I never looked back. I stopped at the bottom of the courthouse steps and let the California sun hit my face for a long moment. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel like it was caving in. Clayton finally had a voice. Justice had finally caught up with the people who thought they were above it. And I was still standing. People ask me if I regret it, walking away from my father, leaving the whole estate behind, refusing to play the part of the forgiving daughter. The truth is, I don't regret a single step. Family is supposed to be your shelter, not your hunting ground. Love doesn't lay bait, and it doesn't calculate your funeral like it's a business expense. Forgiveness isn't something you owe to people who were never sorry in the first place. Some monsters don't hide in the dark. They sit across from you at birthday dinners. They raise toasts to family while planning your last drive home. But here's what they never counted on: the ones they tried to bury can learn to walk on their own. If you've ever had to walk away from people who share your blood just to survive, you already know exactly why I never looked back. Share your story in the comments below. The truth deserves a witness. And so do you. And if you believe justice should find the ones who think they're untouchable, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. I'll be here every week with another story of survival. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope our paths cross again soon.